All right, everybody, we are back. This is day 2 of body composition. We should be able to wrap things up in this class period, and then the next one we'll move on to supplements. But before we do, let's do like a 2-minute recap on what we covered last time. We basically said with body composition, there are a bunch of different models we can use. And in most cases, because the techniques that are most commonly used for body composition are a 2-component model where you're basically just determining whether they have fat mass or fat-free mass and what that is. And the techniques aren't the more expensive techniques we usually don't use. You can do some of these other models, and you can figure out what the exactly how much muscle mass is there and how much bone you've got, bone mineral density, and the whole thing. But in most cases, the techniques we use most commonly, we use a 2-component model. We talked about the difference between fat mass and fat-free mass, and I mentioned the fact that, hey, I'd much rather have somebody who's exercising regularly and maybe have a little bit extra weight around the middle than someone who's not exercising at all, but maybe is a normal weight, because you can't necessarily tell the health of somebody just from looking on the outside. We also talked about BMI and the differences between body composition and BMI, and the fact that BMI just looks at height and weight, and you don't understand, you don't get a full picture of what their body is composed of. Is it more fat? Is it, because we know that the increased risk you have, the more fat mass you have, then the increased risk of disease you have. And with BMI, especially as you're younger, the BMI is really a hard predictor of health risk, because the body's changing as you're growing up, as you're getting older. And so this, just understand the differences between BMI. Because you have a BMI of 25 doesn't mean that you're 25% body fat. I think at this point, hopefully you know that. And then we got into all these different methods of body composition. And we said there's a lot of techniques, all of them with 3 to 5% error. The goal is to assess someone using one technique and stick with that technique. That's when you're going to get the best results, and you're going to set a goal for your people that you're working with and help them progress towards that goal. We then got into underwater weighing or hydrostatic weighing. We said it's the original body composition technique. It uses densitometry, right? Determine how dense you are. And we talked about the fact that fat is less dense than water, and so it floats, and muscle is more dense than water, so it sinks. And then we use this Archimedes principle, the principle of buoyancy, to determine body fat percentage. And there's a whole thing where you're measuring body volume and to get body density. And for us, I don't care that you know all this. You're not going to have to do this or work a formula or do any of that on a test. So just know that this is the original gold standard. We don't use this technique anymore, or much anymore, because you do have to have access to a pool or water, place to pump water in, pump water out, and it becomes really complicated. And so the typical gold standard now is something called a DEXA scan. This is a scan, and as we're going through these, the most important thing to realize, and I would do this if we were in class face-to-face, is this Thursday, you would have a quiz over, I would probably, one of the common questions I would ask is, what are, say, 3 techniques to determine body composition, and tell me how they work, right? So underwater weighing works by looking at water displacement and densitometry, determine how dense the body is. And this is done by a scan, right, where you're scanning the body. And this is the latest gold standard. It's really expensive, but it's passive technique, and it gives you everything. Okay, would be more of the advanced models. But no, like I said, in most cases, we don't have access to this. I don't know. I think, and I took a picture. I was at the heart hospital. The heart hospital apparently can do this technique. I think Baptist probably can too. It said set up an appointment. I took a picture, and I didn't get a chance to put it in the slideshow, but I'll do that at some point, just to show you. They do it at the heart hospital. I think Baptist has that option too. I don't know how much it costs, but and then for us, we talked about the bod pod, and I said, hey, for us, this would be one of if I had to pick one, this would be the technique I would go with, just because it's probably less expensive than DEXA, but it's still going to get some pretty good results. It uses air displacement, where you got that little egg and you fit in the egg and you know how much air's in it without you. And then you open the egg and you get in it and know how much air is displaced. But these last two are probably the most common. And this is why we just use, like we said, the 2-component model with this is you do the skin fold measurements using calipers, and the fact that we know subcutaneous fat is proportional to your overall total body fat. You pinch sites on the body for males and females, and you add the sum of the skin folds, right? You plug that into calculations to end up getting percent body fat. And then the last one is bioelectrical impedance, where you're just holding the handles here and sending an electrical current from one hand to the other, or you do it from foot to foot, or like with this new in-body that they have, you can do arms and legs. I don't know how much more accurate it is than just doing like this handheld, probably not. And again, the whole idea, like we said at the beginning here, the first slide, is you're just trying to get a starting point for percent body fat, and knowing that which direction we'd like to be moving down. If you're 25%, you know, maybe you set a goal for 23, and you're moving slowly towards that goal. So this is new stuff. And as we get into this, one of the questions, and I think some of you probably know the answer to this, is why do athletes want to lose weight? You know, why do they want to? Because usually you have two camps, right? You have athletes that want to lose weight and get leaner, or you have athletes that want to gain muscle. Usually that's the two camps. And so why would you want someone, an athlete, to lose weight? And first off, you need to assess them to see, do they need to lose weight in the first place? But it depends on what sport. Usually what you see is sports that are aesthetically driven, sports that are weight driven. Like if you're running, you're having to carry your weight, or like this cyclist is mountain biker. Anybody mountain biking here? You know, gravel biking is now become this huge thing in Arkansas, is like a mecca for gravel races. And yeah. Or weight class. That's right. If you're trying to get to a weight class, if you're a wrestler or an MMA fighter, yes, it certainly could help you. And with cyclists, they often talk about power to weight ratio. Like you want to be able to generate, like this cyclist here wants to be able to generate as much power as possible climbing that hill. And to do that, you're going to generate more power the less you weigh. If you weigh less and with the same power, then you're going to be moving faster going up this hill. And again, if I'm carrying 20 extra pounds trying to climb up this hill, it's going to be a little more challenging, especially over the miles that I may be climbing, you know. And this, maybe you're going up. Now, it may be helpful going down. That's a good point. I didn't think about that. Could be helpful if you got an extra weight going down, but it's not going to help you going up. That's for sure. Or you, like you said, we've got runners, and you know, carrying an extra 20, 30 pounds across 26.2 miles for a marathon is challenging. And then, yes, you have athletes who are trying to make these weight requirements. So there's just a couple of reasons why athletes want to lose weight. Another one, like I said, is aesthetic reasons. If you've got people that are, let's say, ice skaters, or I don't know, rhythmic gymnasts, I don't know, you can give me some of those, but where you're getting scored on your aesthetics, then maybe that's another reason. And then you've got other athletes. And I remember that this is a slide. This is a track sprint cyclist. We talked about the different, you know, cycling we tend to think of as an endurance sport, but you can have track cyclists. I don't know if we did this at the beginning. I can't remember. It's been a long time. We slept since the first part of the semester. But track cyclists who they sprint around a track, an oval track. any type of athlete that we tend to think of strength and power sports, football, baseball, basketball, they're going to want to, and I say maximize fat-free mass, but essentially what I'm saying here is you're trying to gain muscle. You want muscle to be able to push the bike around the track. You want muscle to be able to push somebody around at the line of scrimmage, or to run faster, to sprint, to carry the football if I'm a running back. Basketball, to be able to, again, you don't want to be over muscular. You don't see any bodybuilders playing in the NBA, but you get the idea. It's desirable for strength and power athletes and muscular endurance activities. Undesirable, though, for people who do endurance sports. Anytime I'm trying to jump up, like if I'm doing a high jump or a pole vault or some of these sports, you want to be lean. You don't necessarily want to have a bunch of extra muscle mass. This was the thing with Lance Armstrong. When he got, years ago, if you've remember that Lance Armstrong, now it's becoming so long ago, a lot of people don't know who he is, but he won like 7 or 8 Tour de France events. But before that, he was just kind of an average cyclist, pretty good. But I mean, you're competing against the best in the world. He ended up getting cancer. And after he came back from cancer, he became this world-class cyclist. But one of the things that happened when he had the cancer is he lost a lot of muscle. And it actually helped him become a better cyclist, along with taking the performance enhancing drugs that he did, that he got caught for, and now he's been shamed. But if you're in a sport like that, you don't want to maximize. You don't want to have a lot of extra muscle. And that's why you want to go on the other end of things and be more of a, hey, be at the lightest weight, increase your power to weight ratio, all these things. But if I'm trying to jump whether it be a high jump, a pole vault, whatever it is, jump up, then that's going to be a challenge. Like I said, you don't see any bodybuilders that are basketball players for a lot of different reasons. So these track cyclists, I don't think I had this in the earlier slides. I don't know what competition this was. What do you think about these? These are quadriceps of elite track cyclists. How about that? Ginormous. Look at the quadriceps on these. And I'm guessing this is like a podium, like first place, second place, third place. But look at the quads on these. This might make a bodybuilder blush. So there are the point of the last couple of slides is just showing you there are some athletes that they want to focus on weight loss and being as light as they can. Like when I'm doing Ironman, I don't intentionally try to lose weight, but because you're exercising so much, and I'm really trying to watch what I eat, I'm not overeating, I'm eating enough, but you just end up losing weight. And it's amazing how quickly you put it back on. I've let myself go over the last couple of months, and I have gained significant amounts of weight back. You think of had a birthday, then Thanksgiving, we got Halloween, we got Christmas coming up, so it comes back pretty quickly. And so when you look at the body fat, almost all sports want their athletes to have a lower body fat. Most sports, no matter what you choose, body fat is negatively related to performance. And so usually detrimental. And so low body fat is desirable in sports that move your weight through space anytime, which is most of them, right? Basketball, football, baseball. A lower body fat is preferred. Running, any track event, whether you're doing long distance or you're doing sprints, less body fat is better. If you're playing a sport like tennis, competitive tennis, you're going to see that most of them are pretty lean. I'm just trying to think what else. but there are other sports that maybe body fat's not as, and if you were to look at like colleges and college athletes, you tend to see at the highest level that they tend to have lower body fats as you go into, and I used to teach, right? I teach at Hendrix, and even at Arkansas Tech. And so what you tend to see is as you go from D1 to D2 to D3, like Hendrix, the athletes at Hendrix, no slight to them, but they end up having a little more body fat than some of these other sports and other, not always, but in some of these other like top level, because there's not, in some of these top level colleges and universities, they've got sports dietitians, they've got a whole cafeteria just for the athletes. You know what I'm saying? There's a lot more catering to that athlete, which makes it easier. They don't do that at some of these other smaller colleges. Even here at UCA, I don't think there's not a dietitian working with the athletes. Maybe there should be, but body fat amounts are important. And here's what I want to point out too. I'll do it now while I'm thinking about it. Is that make sure, and I think I'll have this coming up on a slide too, but don't compare yourself, you females, to the males, right? Females should have more body fat than the males. So when we start looking at some of these numbers, not that they will all the time, it depends on who you're comparing, but males will have less body fat than the females because they have more muscle, right? And females have more fat in the like sex specific sites, so they're just going to have a little more, and that's okay. Don't compare yourself to the males as far as body fat goes. But there are some sports, and this is pretty lame, sumo wrestler, I got to do a better job with this, but there are some sports where body fat is an advantage. And I was doing, maybe I mentioned this before, but years ago, I did a CEU class where like a 6-hour training on sports nutrition. And, I would give continuing education. It would be for people in exercise fields and nutrition and chiropractics and PT. And I'd have athletic trainers. I have all kinds of people. And one of the athletic trainers asked me if I'd ever heard of something called a power gut. Anybody ever heard of that? I'll type it in the chat. Power gut. That'll get your attention. Anybody heard of that? It's something that these power lifters do and have, that because they have a little excess in the belly, it helps lower their center of gravity. You can look it up. And so by lowering their center of gravity, they're able to lift more, which is interesting. And then, you see sports like sumo wrestlers, the bigger, you're just looking at mass. Yeah, it's great if it's muscle, but if it's fat, then hey, I'm just trying to push somebody. They've got this ring, and the whole goal of this sumo wrestling is not really wrestling. It's just, you're just pushing somebody out of this ring. I think that's how, I don't know all the rules, but I think you get the idea. And here's another sport where you have an extra body fat may not be as bad is swimming, right? Because we already said that fat floats, and having that extra body fat may actually help buoy your body on the water and improve your technique a little bit. Not always, but like it may not be as detrimental as, say, some other sports, because you're in the water. And there may be a few others. I don't know if y'all can think of any while you're here that where having more fat may help. I don't know. That's a good one. Not many. How about that? We could definitely say that. Not many sports where having extra fat will be helpful. There are some. And lineman in football, thank you. Yes, exactly. There you go. That's a common one, right? You see some of these linemen, they're going to have a lot of muscle, but they're also going to be just big and have some extra fat. And that's good point you make, Ella, is that a lot of times these linemen, when they go through high school, college, and even like the pro ranks, you hear a lot of these pros ended up with heart disease and health issues because they have all this excess body fat and weight. A lot of them will get it off. Like you see some of these sports commentators for football, and you go back and look, it's like, oh, they used to play football. They were a lineman, but they were significantly heavier. And they've lost a lot of weight, and that's great. But yes, in their playing days, yeah, I had a guy, high school, once he stopped playing football, he leaned up pretty quickly. Yeah. And that's what they do, right? When you got somebody who's, and some of these linemen now are like, even in high school and college, are 300 pounds, 6'2", 6'3", 6'5", 300, 350, big. And this is offensive and defensive lines. I just remember, oh gosh, I'm dating myself here. There's an old movie called Wildcats. I don't know how to spell her name. This is not even close. Goldie Hawn. I've seen several NFL linemen lose ridiculous amount. Yeah. Thomas Russell. Yeah. Goldie Hawn was in this movie called Wildcats, and they had this big guy. I mean, he was just huge. And they just put him in the game as a lineman to block just because he was so big. And he didn't really do anything. He just stood up, and he just was so massive. Anyway, it was just kind of funny. Made me think of that. So just know that that's depending on the athlete, depending on their goals. You just have to work with them to help them achieve that. And sometimes it's gaining muscle, and that takes some time. It's not as easy as you might think. Other times it's losing body fat. And as we look at this, I always do this on the board, but I'm glad I have it here in the slideshow. So when you look at numbers, it depends on what book you look at. And I haven't looked at a recent like fitness assessment book to see but these were the numbers that have been used in the past. So if you are, and I like these, breaking them down to categories. So you got at risk on the low end. So if you're under 5% for men and under 9 for women, you're at risk on the low end. We tend to think of body fat oftentimes at risk on the high end. So if you're over 25% for men, if you're over 32, 35% for females, we're at risk. And we know what we're at risk for on the high end, right? What are we at risk for on the high end? We just kind of mentioned that. Somebody help me out. Yeah. Yeah. Coronary heart disease, obesity, all the things. And then you have like above average. What does above average mean? Well, in general, the average is around 15% for men and 23% for women. And again, it can vary for percentage to one way or the other. But point is, this is the average. So if I'm 16 to 24% for men and say 24 to 31 for women, that's still a healthy range. It's just above average. That makes sense. So it's still healthy. It's just above average. And then you have average. And then this is where most of our athletes will be, below average. Just meaning, it's below, you're not at risk. You're just low. And that's what you're going to see with most of our athletes, is they're going to be low. And depending on what sport you're looking at, some could be, the percent fats change depending on the sport. And then here's what we tend to not think of too much, but at risk on the low end. We usually don't have to think too often about athletes being too low. But what happens if they're too low body fat? What does that put them at risk for? Yeah, malnutrition, so not getting in, so vitamin and mineral deficiencies, okay. And what happens? Take that to an extreme. What does that mean? Malnutrition. What does that mean? Yeah, there you go. That's the most extreme. So it's some kind of eating disorder. And let me give you an example of how this could play out. This happened to me, and I still tell this story. It's been, I don't know, 10, 20 years ago. I had a student come into my office. Maybe she was an athlete. I don't know that she was, but it doesn't matter. She came into the lab when I worked at Hendrix, and she was like, "Yeah, I'm looking for somebody. I wanted to test my body fat. I want to see what my body fat percentage is." I'm like, "Sure, not a problem." And just by looking at her, I could tell that she had some type of eating disorder. I mean, she was just skin and bones, no body fat. You know, if her eyes were sunken in to a point, but you could tell that there was something going on. But you can't, you know, when you're working with somebody and you're counseling, this is a counseling situation here. You can't just go directly in and say, "Hey, you got an eating disorder. You need some help." You know what I'm saying? You can't take that approach. And so what we did is I'm like, "Sure, come on over. Let me measure your body fat." So I measured her body fat. It was like 6 or 7%. It was low. And so what that allowed me to do is say, okay, you know, the normal body fat percentage for females is this, it's 23, but you're here, you're at 6 or 7. And that's at risk. What is going, you know, then you can start to bridge that conversation into how can I help? Because that's really what you want to do. Does that make sense? How you can transition like a test like this into, okay, let me get you some help. What's going on? That's really low. I'm worried about you. You know, what can we do? It's a much easier transition. It's not a comfortable conversation either way it goes, but it's definitely easier than you just somebody walking into your, you know, to you to say, "Hey, I need your help," and you just flat out saying, "You got an eating disorder." That usually doesn't go well. That usually gets them to leave pretty quickly. And then it just leads to other things. So this is an example of how doing a test like this, doing an assessment, can lead to you helping them help them get the help they need, if that makes sense. So, but these are the percent body fats. Like I said, most athletes are going to be on the low end. And here's what you get. I think I pulled this from an exercise physiology textbook, to be honest. But you can look if you're doing softball, baseball, you know, 8 to 14% for men, and again, the women you're going to see are going to be a little higher, and they should be, no matter what the sport. Now, that doesn't mean that if I had a super lean, fit female, that she wouldn't have less body fat than, say, just an average Joe, you know, off the street. It depends on but if you had to compare like fit female versus fit male, the fit female is going to have a little more body fat. Versus if I'm a fit and trained female versus an untrained male, then yeah, there's a good chance that the female will have less body fat. But just know you shouldn't really compare males to females. And then as you go through, you can see all these different sports, and they're all going to be on the low end. You know, volleyball 7 to 15% for men and 10 to 18 for women. You know, it also depends on the time of year. Are you in the off season or in season? And that's like, you know, me, I was just giving you an example. You know, I'm training for Ironman, you know, that's like 5 to 6 months. Then I take it pretty serious, and I'm slowly losing weight over time to get to my, what I call my goal weight or my race weight. But then like now I let myself go, and this is where I need to be careful, because I probably gained in the last month about 10 pounds would be my guess. I can tell my clothes are starting to fit a little tighter than what they were when I was training 15 hours a week or something. So in season, off season can definitely affect body composition. And so when you look at body fat and just the idea of weight, the body composition and weight really, you need to have this standardized, and there's not a lot of research out there. And I don't know that sports and coaches and trainers really pay too much attention to this and setting up standards for their athletes. You know, the only sport I can think of where they might do this is in wrestling, because you're trying to get to a particular weight. And when I was doing these seminars across the country years ago, my athlete trainers would say they're kind of in charge of these athletes and whether they wrestle or not, because they're measuring their body fat on a pretty regular basis to make sure they're not too low, and trying to lose too much weight. So they are preventing them. And as far as that goes, like for football players and some of these others, like we mentioned, it's a good idea to weigh themselves before and after training just to see how much weight they've lost, so they can replenish that stuff. But optimal ranges for relative body fat should be established, and even if it's an individual, just to kind of track them over time. And it is sport and event specific, and it's gender specific too, with all these different individual differences. And some sports and activities, they do focus on weight, and that's not necessarily the best approach. We talk about that with like wrestling, we talk about that with like MMA or boxing or some of this other, but even things like, anybody seen this? And I guess they're still showing some reruns of this. Like they used to have this show about the Dallas Cowboy cheerleaders. Anybody know a cheerleader? Anybody know a cheerleader or someone? You've seen the show where they would measure their body weight, and the cheerleader had to be under a certain body weight. And if they weren't, then they weren't allowed to cheer, which I think is a little crazy. But and you just have to be careful as a coach. And I don't know if I mentioned this before, but years ago when I was at Ole Miss, we did this big survey of female cross country runners. And one of the questions we asked were, has your coach ever told you that losing weight would improve performance? And there was like 50-60% of them that said yes, or maybe it's even higher. I can't remember now, but a large percentage told their athletes, which is a problem when you have, especially female athletes, and you're telling them to lose weight. They need to be eating enough, right, to prevent that female athlete triad, which we talked about. I think I mentioned it, where you're not eating enough, so you end up not having a menstrual cycle, which is called amenorrhea. That can lead to an eating disorder. It can also lead to the fact that if you're not eating enough, then you're not laying down bone like you need to. So it could cause osteoporosis. So it's just a whole bag of issues related to that. And it's never a good thing. It's a serious conversation to have. And, like I said, many sports do enforce a weight standard, but it is, and I probably should pull this up and put some of these images in my slideshow around this, because some athletes will do some really wacky things to lose weight, and they'll lose extreme amounts of weight. And some athletes have died, like in MMA lately in the last several years. There have been people die because they've tried to cut too much weight. And these athletic commissions will, if they spot this and see that this athlete, because what will happen is oftentimes they'll get in trouble even before they get to the fight week, and they just cancel the bout. Other times they get into the week and they're trying to really cut the extreme amount of weight, and they'll get on the scale. And if they don't, they usually weigh, and I think athletes are doing this, wrestlers are doing this now too, is they have to weigh the day before the competition. You guys can tell me if that's the case for high school wrestlers now, college wrestlers, where they're weighing the day before, or at least in the morning, so that they don't have to go through this extreme weight cut. They try not to let them do that. So they'll weigh the night before, 24 hours before. But then what ends up happening is they put on like 10, 20 pounds before their event. They don't want that to happen, but it's the reality of things. And they will do just some extreme things. Yeah. Sweat it out, where they have those black sweatsuits. One of the craziest things I've heard, and I don't know if you've heard this before with wrestlers, is spitting. Anybody heard this? Basically, they're spitting in a cup, and they do that, and they carry a cup around with them all day, and they're just spitting in it. It's not like they're dipping, they're just spitting. You see MMA athletes, they're in these salt baths, and where the salt's supposed to pull the water, their fluid out of them. It's just, there's a lot of crazy things that happen. They're in these sweatsuits running out in the middle of the summer to try to meet that target weight for their event. And I may have said this before, but think about this: if they end up losing all this weight so much that it's has them in a depleted state, and they go into a fight, that could be bad for them if they haven't recovered enough. The performance will suffer. And so extreme weight loss can cause, obviously, these are things you're probably familiar with: dehydration, chronic fatigue, diminished performance, soreness. And so it's almost like overtraining, where you're doing too much work, but except you're cutting back so severely that your body thinks that it's depleted, and it is depleted of nutrients, of fluid, of all the things, and it can just lead to poor performance. So just know that does happen in sport. It's the ugly side of sport, and maybe I should put some links for y'all in Blackboard, but that is really a challenge. And knowing, and this is one of the things too in the assignment that you do, the target body weight assignment, the whole goal of that is to know, okay, I'm this weight right now, and I'm this percent body fat. Let's say I'm 200 pounds and I am 25% body fat. And if I were to lose down to 20% body fat, lose 5% fat, how much would I weigh? That's the calculation. That's what that calculation does. It's in your book. I've got a separate video, I think, in Blackboard too, to show you how a walkthrough on that, but it's just a simple equation. But that's how it's useful, is to say, okay, if you lost this much body fat, what would your weight be? Okay. And when you're counseling people for weight loss and healthy weight loss, right? What are some strategies? You hate to say loss. A lot of times the more politically correct thing to say is management. And truth is, we're all managing our weight, no matter where you are. Unless you're lucky, you're one of the lucky ones where you don't have to worry about your weight. And maybe you're like that now, but as you get older, things change. But weight management strategies, these are things, some of these you're probably familiar with. We want to set a realistic goal, obviously, body composition and a weight goal. And these are some of the questions I ask, and maybe we talked about this, but what's the lowest weight you've maintained without dieting? What's the lowest weight you've been before? And how long ago was that? Most of them will say, oh, it's back, 20 years ago when I was in high school. Well, that's probably not realistic for us to try to achieve that. Let's start with something a little smaller. And then what's the maximum amount of weight? What's the biggest you've been? To kind of to put that in perspective for them. And then always, it's hard to do a lot of times with some of these athletes who need to meet a weight standard, but to reduce the focus on the scale. There are a lot of other, and I've had clients like this. I was like, okay, have you weighed lately? I'll ask them about weight, and they're like, I have no idea. They're scared of the scale. They don't even want to weigh. And I'm like, that's okay. There's just a lot of other ways to measure success. And maybe y'all can put this in here. Besides the scale, what's another way to monitor success with managing their weight? I'll let you type it in. I'll call it beyond the scale. So besides the scale and weight, how else can you measure success? Okay, give me one, somebody. Come on now. You can figure this out. What else? Oh, come on now. This is a senior level class. Are y'all asleep on me? Is my video cutting out? Okay, feeling maybe one. Okay, feelings are give me something a little more objective. And I did this just the other day, how they're performing. Okay, that's a good one. Okay. Their size. Now, Gabby, tell me about size. What do you mean by that? I had a woman tell me this because I just did a counseling session with somebody the other day, and that's exactly what they told me. I'm like, I was asking her about weight because you have to talk about these things, right? That's what she wants to do. She wants to lose weight, but she's not measuring herself on the scale. Calorie intake, maybe. So, what did she tell me? Oh, come on, you guys are dancing around it. Losing inches, okay. How do you measure inches? Tape measure, right? So here's just a couple. Your measurements, you're exactly right. And that's what she told me. She's like, you know what, I got some clothes that I want to get into that I was into, say a month or two ago. Not like clothes since she was when she was a kid, but that's what she wanted to do. Is she wanted to use clothes as a measuring stick of moving in the right direction. And you're right. You can do measurements. You can do waist and hips and thighs and all the things. You can monitor the performance, like Ella said. You can monitor their behaviors. Those are because ultimately that's what it comes down to, right? How much exercise, what is their diet looking like? What are they improving? These are all things that can help them. It's because the truth is there are um, different types of goals, right? Their behavior goals and their outcome goals. And most people want to focus on the outcomes. Are you tracking with me here? I mean, this kind of goes along with the last bullet here, last thing. It says must adopt healthy lifestyle. Most people want the outcome goal. Most people want the 50-pound weight loss. And so they're so focused on the scales, but to get to the scales, to get to the results they want, they've got to change the behaviors, and there's so many people, I can't tell you how many I work with that just, they're not willing to do the work, so when you have somebody, because this will be common, this isn't just with athletes, this will be the sedentary population in particular. It's like they don't like to cook. They don't like, my my first thing for this gal I was talking to the other day is I don't know how I came up with this, but I call it her name was Kathy. Kathy's fruit and vegetable, what I call it, fruit and vegetable challenge. I call it, okay, this is Kathy's fruits and vegetable challenge. We need her to get, she's eaten 0 fruits and vegetables. I'll say that again. 0, nothing, nada. So you can't say, okay, the go. Anybody know how many fruits and vegetables we're supposed to eat a day? Type that in the chat. How many fruits and vegetables a day? Give me a number. 3 servings a day? Oh, come on, Ella. You should know better than that. 3? Come on now. Help us. Maybe we should start with that in class. Anybody else? Nobody knows. Maybe that's the problem. Here's the deal. We need a minimum of 5. And some will say 5 to 7. You know, if you look at the dietary guidelines, they want you to eat like, I forgot what it is, like 2.5 cups of vegetables and 2 cups of fruit. But it's around 5 to 7 and maybe even more. But here's the reality: 1 in 10, this is the latest statistic, only 1 in 10 actually eat enough fruits and vegetables. But so that's what we wanted to tackle first with Kathy, is like there's 0, like it's all processed. It's convenience foods. She's drinking 4 regular sodas a day. You know, those are the simple things when you're working with people that you can start with, you know, what we call it, the low hanging fruit, right? It might not be easy, because she basically came to me and says, yeah, I heard one of my other coworkers, he was talking about the Mediterranean diet and how he was having success with it, and I want to try it. But anybody know about the Mediterranean diet? Guess what you got to do when you eat the Mediterranean diet? Somebody that she's not doing, besides eating fruits and vegetables. You got to cook. She wasn't cooking at all, or isn't cooking, and not taking time to meal prep, and which is one of the reasons she's not eating fruits and vegetables, because she won't go to the store and buy it, and just sees it as a big hurdle instead of an opportunity, and to be able to do this. So these are the types of challenges that you have when you're working with somebody. But ultimately, like I said, to measure success, it comes back to the behaviors. You know, yes, you can track it with measurements, you can track it with clothes, you can track it with your energy levels, you can track it with performance, you can track it with all these different things, but it comes back to the behavior too. Cutting down on the hamburgers and French fries, right? And for athletes, this is one of the big things too that I've tried to adopt. It's not as easy as it sounds. And you've heard this from, especially in professional athletes, because those folks are getting paid so much money anyway. There really isn't an off season. You've heard that, like, anymore. There isn't an off season. They're training year round. And so if you could stay within shooting distance or shooting range of your goal, you know, within 5 to 10% of your goal weight, or, you know, within a percent or two, 5% of your body target body composition, body fat, then that would be good. So you never have to just start from scratch. And that's, I've told you example of me, that's tends to be what happened. I'm fighting it right now, but I'm gaining weight, and it's like, okay, it's time to slow the progressive weight loss here, and I'm at a good weight right now. I'm at about 160 ish, I'll say. I was probably closer to 152. I'm guessing. I didn't weigh there because I didn't have scales when I was in California. I'm 160ish right now, but I don't want to be 170. Nope. So it's time to tighten the belt and get serious about getting back on track. And that's what it's about, right? And you can't, when you're talking weight loss with folks, you want to avoid the fasting and the crash dieting, the grapefruit diet. Isn't going to work. Okay. Just know that. The soup diet, cabbage soup diet, probably not going to work. And just progressively go up to, usually, this, right? 1 to 2 pounds a week. But nobody likes to hear that. They want it off like tomorrow. But reality is to do it. And just, again, it starts with those behaviors. And then once you get closer to your goal, then obviously you can lose it a little less. Or it becomes harder to monitor too when you start looking at clothes and inches. Inches come off though. Everybody's different. Like for me, when I lose weight, I don't usually lose like a pound at a time. I usually lose, like, for some reason, like 5 pounds. It falls off. And remember, when you're losing weight, there's no such thing as spot reduction. We talked about that, right? Spot reduction. Can't do it. So when I start losing, I can't say where it's going to come off. It's just going to come off where it wants to. Usually what they say is the last place you put it on is the first place it comes off. Like the last place I started seeing it is under my chin. I started getting that goozle, getting that little extra around the goozle here, then it might come off there first. But there are some places for me, it's just not going to come off. My love handles, eventually, I don't care how lean I am, I'm still going to have it. Okay. Other tips, again, I think is that you just want to cut back on the calories, anywhere from 200 to 500, depending on the individual. You don't want it to go too extreme. You want it to be where you don't miss the calories so much. Minimum of 3 meals a day. If you do snacks, that's okay. But what I find is that if you're eating, snacking just becomes a problem. With athletes, if they're burning a bunch of calories, not a problem. Snack all you want. But if you're trying to lose weight and get down to a goal body composition, then the snacking, you just want to make sure you're eating till you're full at your meals so that you don't necessarily have to snack. And if you want to snack, you just have to make them small. And obviously you want to try to incorporate some resistance training along with some endurance training. Both is usually the best approach. Again, try not to avoid your favorite foods. And unfortunately, most of our favorite foods are the convenience dessert type foods, and try not to classify them as good or bad, because that puts people in a like, they want the things they can't have. So when you say this is bad and you can't do it, then that's the first thing they're going to think about, is having that chocolate bar. And then identify strengths and weaknesses. I think we talked about this, when you have somebody recall what they're doing, most of the time they're not doing everything poorly. There's a positive spin that you can put on this and decide, okay, you're getting in plenty of protein. Now let's look and see how we can get in more healthy fat, or whatever that may be. So that's helpful. And then the last thing is, we talked about this. This is the target body weight formula. And I'll go over it real quickly here in video, but there's a whole video, I think, separate in Blackboard that walks you through this. And the assignment, I think, is from, I called him Jerry. He's a race car driver. So the way this works is your target body weight is equal to your current fat-free mass divided by 1. This is just keeping it simple. 1 minus the desired percent body fat. And so what this is your current fat-free mass is determined by what your body weight is, right? So if I'm 200 pounds and I said this earlier, and I'll just say it, I'm 25% fat, what am I fat-free? If I'm 25% fat, and I have to pull out my calculator here, what am I fat-free? And you're trying to get the weight, right? It's not the percent of fat-free mass, it's the actual weight of fat-free mass. So what do? 200 pounds, and there's a couple different ways you can do it. If I'm 25% fat, what am I fat-free? What percentage then? Type in the chat. Come on now. You can do this. Nobody? Yeah, there you go. Thank you. That's exactly right. So if you're 75% fat-free, and so you do 0.75 times 200, that's 150. Or you could do it the opposite, right? You could, based on what I gave you, you could go, I recommend what Gage has done here, but if you know this, so you could go times 0.25 to get that, and that would be the pounds of body fat, pounds of fat. And then you could subtract that minus 200. That makes sense. I recommend what Gabe's done, because if you're 25% fat, then you're 75% fat free. There you go. Yeah, you can do that. So then that's the numerator. The denominator is 1 minus, and so let's say you're 25% fat now and you want to be 22% fat, then it's just 1 minus 0.22 equals, right? And so that's like 0.78. Is that right? So if I want to be 22%, you have to do it as a decimal. Okay, you can't put 22 in there. 0.22. So then what this comes out to be is, if I'm doing this right, 150 divided by 0.78 equals whatever that is. Somebody gauges the one with the calculator here. I don't have it in front of me. Anybody? Oh, yeah. What'd you get? Am I gonna have to pull this up? You get something funky and you're like, wait a minute, Dr. Mayo, this is not right. Which could happen. Like, 7, 8. Oh, no, that's it. Yeah, 192 pounds. That's right. That's right. So they should weigh, if they lost 3% body fat, which is not much, right? So 200 minus 198, 190, sorry. Yeah, so 192, which is 192 equals 8 pounds. So they would have to lose 8 pounds. And again, if you look at this equation, this is formula assumes that euhydration, so they're adequately hydrated, and there's a constant fat-free mass. So you're not, basically they're saying you're not gaining a bunch of muscle. There's not a whole lot of change there. We're looking at the body fat. So if you're only losing fat, which we know most of the time that doesn't necessarily happen, but we're just assuming that it does for this. And then here's me working it out. Well, here they are working it out. I don't know if this is going to be exactly. So let's say you've got somebody and they're 190 pounds and they're 16% body fat. Current fat-free mass is 84%, right? So you use that as a decimal. So you calculate that to be 160, 190 times 0.84. And their goal is 10%. Now that's pretty low. I mean, you're 6%, going from 16 to 10. So you do the math on this, and that ends up with 0.9. 1 minus 0.1 is 0.9. And here's another trick if you want to just do this easier. The goal, like the desired, like when you look at this formula, basically the denominator here is when you look at the desired percent fat, it's the desired percent fat free. So you see 0.9. That's how you would do that if you wanted. I just use the formula because I don't want to confuse anybody, but this denominator here is basically your desired percent fat free as a decimal, right? So if your goal is 0.1 or 10%, then your goal fat free is 90, and it's just 0.9. But I'll use the formula. But so you do the math and it's 178 pounds. So they would have to lose 12 pounds to get to their target body weight. Everybody following that? You'll get a chance to practice that when you do your assignment. So hopefully that helps with the weight loss. It's a common formula that's used. So we'll wrap this up. We just have about 10 minutes or so. Give you a couple of strategies here, because a lot of folks, need to lose weight and they have struggle losing weight. There are other people that want to gain muscle and have really trouble. Anybody in here that has trouble gaining muscle mass? And this is why it's genetics, right? This is a body type. If you look at the type over here on the left, you've got what's called the ectomorph. Anybody heard of that before? Ectomorphs? Ectomorphs are those that are thin and tall and lean. These folks have a lot of trouble gaining muscle because of the genetics. They're great endurance athletes and great runners and, super thin no matter what they do, but that means they have trouble putting on muscle. And so then you have the mesomorph here in the middle. And the mesomorph is more like, I'll give an example of me. I'm a mesomorph. Short body segments, muscular, naturally muscular, but they have a tendency to gain weight pretty easily. Losing it's not so easy. Gaining weight's pretty easy. Gaining muscle still a challenge, but I would probably be a better bodybuilder than I would be an endurance athlete. But that's your mesomorph. And then the endomorph is kind of the heavier, bigger, more body fat. And, you know, it's just a genetic thing. And this individual has an extremely hard time losing weight. And it's easy to put it on, like even for me, like it's a seafood, a seafood, and I gain weight. So you've got a lot of things happening here. You got age, you got genetics, the body type, hormones. You know, if you're a hypothyroid, if you have low thyroid, that's going to make it hard for you to lose. But at the same time, hyper makes it hard to gain muscle mass. And then your nutrition situation, what are your calories? So to gain muscle, the first thing you have to know, the first principle is you've got to have a positive calorie balance. You got to be eating a lot more calories than you need. Can you eat extra protein? Absolutely. But you should also be eating a little bit of extra fat and an extra carbohydrate too. But what you've also got to do to achieve that, what we call muscle hypertrophy, right? Muscle growth, is you've got to not only increase your calorie intake, but you got to lift, and you got to lift heavy. This is not just go into the weight room and do 2 sets of, 25. This is like, let's get in the weight room and let's challenge ourselves to failure, and let's push our bodies to change, because that's what you have to do. It doesn't happen overnight. Like I get a kick out of people who they get on the scale and they're like, oh, they're trying to lose weight, and they're like, oh, I've gained 2 pounds. I must be putting on muscle. And I'm laughing. I'm like, no, that's probably not the case. So it takes a while for you to gain muscle. And how much extra? So I'm just going to give you a couple ballpark numbers. To support 1 extra pound of muscle mass, that's about 2,300 calories a week extra. So you're looking at an extra 400, 500 extra calories a day. And then like I said, you can have some extra protein with this. 15, 20 grams would be fine of extra protein. And you're also going to need some carbs and some fats in there too. What we tend to see, and you do, like I said, have to have a top-notch resistance training program. And this is where if you're trying to gain muscle and you need extra calories, then that's where you're going to do your 3 meals. And you're going to do probably 2 snacks, maybe 3. So I'd say a minimum of 5 meals. And this is what ended up happening for these people. They come to me and they're trying to gain muscle and they're trying to do better. And they're like, look, I'm eating. It feels like I'm eating all the time. Anybody with me on this where you're trying to gain size, gain weight, but you can't? Look, I'm eating all the time. I'm like, well, tell me what you're eating. And they do a recall and everything they're eating is healthy. It's so healthy that it doesn't have any calories. How many calories are in extra apples? Not that many. Not that you want to eat junk, but you got to eat those extra calories. And it may feel like you're eating all the time, but most of the time what I find is the people that are trying to gain the extra weight and gain the muscle is they're eating so healthy is they're not getting in enough calories. They still have to get those calories in. And one of the other things too, because you are going to have to eat more, is you want to increase the number of items on your plate and get as many food groups as you can to reduce taste fatigue. So you eat the same thing over and over and over. If you eat chicken over and over and over, you get old, you get tired. So you have to spice it up, right? And having more food items on your plate helps do that. Again, don't skip meals. And the last thing I'll say is around sleep. Sleep is really the only time that you're recovering. We always talk about recovering and letting your body grow and time for the muscles to build and repair themselves is when you're resting. And sleeping and getting adequate amounts of sleep, and more research is coming out on this, is that it really does help improve your recovery and help muscle growth, is to get in adequate amounts of sleep, because that truly is the only time that you are recovering. All right. So we made it. We are done with chapter 10. Questions, comments? So what we'll do is we'll end it today, and the next class we'll come back and we'll talk about one of our favorite topics, my favorite topics, and that's supplements. Because there's so many of them out there, so many things to talk about. We can't cover it all, but we'll hit some of the tops of the trees and talk about some of these supplements that you may have questions about. So if you do, bring them on Thursday and we'll jump into supplements. Sound good? Give me a thumbs up. Let me know you're still with me. I've got 18, 19 of you still here. I appreciate you coming on, giving it your best. We'll see y'all next time. Have a good one. Bye.